and welcome to Brain Says Strange Things. I'm Patrick, this is my brother Jordan, and this is our first episode of the Halloween season, our first October filmed episode. And we came up with a pretty fun double feature this time out. We watched a couple of movies which both feature undead pets. So while the two movies have that in common, they are otherwise pretty different films. We watched Tim Burton's recent adaptation of his own short film, Frankenweenie. So this is the first animated horror movie,
it's a first
horror comedy that we'll be discussing on Brain Says Strange Things. And we paired that with Pet Semetary, which is adapted from Stephen King's famous novel of the same name. So we watched Frankenweenie first, so I think we will start off with a discussion of that film. As can probably be inferred from the title, Frankenweenie is about a strange boy who lives in a very strange Tim Burton town. And this film is animated in the style of movies like A Nightmare Before Christmas, and the stop-motion style that Tim Burton has made famous. So this boy, he's a kind of solitary kid. He makes little monster movies and incorporates his beloved dog into them. The dog's name is Sparky, I think, right?
Yep.
But poor little Sparky is killed. And then, of course, Victor resurrects
Victor
Sparky.
Frankenstein.
Yeah, resurrects Sparky. And the dog comes back to life as a kind of patched together but very friendly still Frankenweenie. And a lot of other weird things happen, but I mean the story really climaxes towards the end when the other children in the town resurrect their own pets. And they come back to life in varying forms, including one that will please fans of the Gamera series of Japanese monster films. Yes, I did like that part.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty fun, enjoyable movie. You know, tons of homages to classic horror films, and it's in black and white, which I thought was a bold choice, but really appropriate for this movie. So what did you think of Frankenweenie?
I liked it a lot. You haven't seen the short?
No.
I saw it probably like a few years ago. It's pretty much, I don't want to say it's the same story, but if you chop off like the first 10 minutes and you add the last 10 minutes, that's kind of what the movie is.
Yeah, I can see
It ends
that.
at the windmill. It starts with them kind of like the same way. The whole middle section where the other kids discover how to bring your pet back to life, which is really simple. You just electrocute them.
Yep.
That was all added new, obviously.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would have assumed.
It'd be hard to do in a live action short,
Yeah.
a student film, I guess it was. So that part of it I found really interesting. That's why I wanted to see it in the first place. I thought that was kind of a fun little kids movie, maybe on the borderline where you're just starting to get into like getting out of the animated movie phase of your life, and you're like you want to look at more intense movies, I suppose. It's kind of a good bridge movie that way.
Well, it was surprising to me how dark of a movie it was.
Yeah.
And it's, produced and distributed by Disney, but it's very much a Tim Burton movie. And for a children's animated film, they really don't shy away from the creepy factor at all. I mean,
no, a lot of those characters could fit in with like Beetlejuice, which is obviously
very
meant
much
for
so.
a
Yeah,
more
and
grown-up audience.
I always appreciate sort of subversive children's entertainment, so I really liked all of that about it. But really, throughout the movie, I was really surprised with what they got away with. The whole premise is rather disturbing. And none of the characters are cute. They're all sort of, they have that kind of Tim Burton kind of creepy look. I mean, the children in the town are, many of them are modeled after either classic horror characters or character actors. So there's a lot of little touchstones for people who are fans of classic horror. But yeah, it was just a really dark kind of twisted movie. And another thing I liked, there's a little bit of a theme about
Science.
Yeah,
like that too.
of course, there's the town forms themselves into a mob of villagers with flaming torches. But there is that kind of theme of them turning against this science teacher and being afraid of science and progress and things like that. That was good. I like that, but the movie doesn't end with any kind of a moral, because you would expect that, and even in Frankenstein, the moral is kind of like, okay, well, there's a line that you should not cross. There has to be a consequence for this action. But at the end of this movie, I mean, not to spoil it, the town kind of comes over to Victor's side, and they bring the dog back, which, I mean, you can imagine in the hands of another filmmaker, or maybe in a different situation, the studio stepping in and saying, what kind of a message are we sending out here? Yeah. But I like that they were just kind of true to the world of the movie, and they didn't try to make a big moral message of it or anything like that.
I did like the message with the science, because I've watched like a lot of recent animated movies, and it seems, I think I watched like 3 in a row where the message was all the same. Now I think they're good movies, but the message is always like, they always have the same characters too. It's always, your parents are teaching you to think, and it was actually kind of in this movie too a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's like your parents are constantly on your back teaching you to be, like, conform and all this stuff. And then they meet someone else, and then that spins them off in a new direction, causing them to think differently.
Yeah.
That's like
it's
a classic
typical
story.
Yeah.
And it can be done well, and it can be done really bad, and I've seen those examples of that. Which is ironic, because all those movies are like telling you to think differently, but they're all kind of the same,
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I did appreciate that this was kind of saying something different about science, and the reason I like that is because you don't really hear that message. Yeah. It's a really simple message for kids, I think it's great. I think it's interesting. It didn't follow the typical line. You're right, and at the very end, when you're like, how are they going to sum this up?
Right.
And then they don't. It's just kind of like a cute little scene.
They really didn't.
It's fine.
And he even, and the dog seems to have died again at the end, you know what I mean? And the kid turns to his dad and said, like, well, Dad, you told me sometimes you have to let them go. And in another movie, that would maybe be the message to end on.
Yeah, and then he comes back.
But in this one, the dad's like, sometimes, parents are wrong or whatever, and the town comes together and resurrect the dog. No real message for a child to carry out of that.
It's hard to end your movie on the shot of a dead dog.
Well, that's true, too. You kind of want the dog to be alive at the end, too. It was a really fun movie. I liked all of the different, pets and creatures that came back to life. It was really fun. I love that they filmed it in black and white. I thought that was really cool.
And they also they don't really say, but it's pretty much like period piece. It's sort of like a 50s.
Well, it definitely has that look to it. Yeah, I think it's sort of, set in
period
unspecified.
Piece is probably taking it too far.
Yeah, it's kind of set in an unspecified time period, but it's very much, an homage to those old Universal
almost like
movies.
Steampunk thing. It's like sort of 50s.
Yeah.
So it looks kind of like the old Universal movies, which it's trying to emulate.
Yeah.
So.
Well, is there anything you didn't like about Frankenweenie? Because I had a lot of fun watching it, but I don't think it was like a great animated film.
Well, I'd like to hear some of your complaints about it, because I didn't really have very many. I think my main complaint with like movies like that is they always seem that they go on too long. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel that way about this movie at all.
See, I actually did think this one dragged a little bit.
Really?
And it doesn't have a long runtime at all.
No.
But I did feel like, I think like the Pixar films are obviously kind of like the gold standard for animation right now.
Yeah, they typically have better stories.
Yeah, I think it lacked some of the energy and momentum of those Pixar films. It seemed to just kind of...
It's trying to be a dark, brooding movie, though, too.
Yeah, it just didn't quite move along at the pace that I'm used to seeing in animated films. It wasn't bad, it wasn't quite boring, but the pacing seemed a little off to me a little bit. I also thought it could have been funnier.
Yeah.
It was kind of a horror comedy, and I didn't... There were a few really funny moments. I like when the science teacher gets up in front of the PTA and calls them all idiots. That was funny. There's a few other moments. But I thought
he calls them imbeciles. He's like, is that the word I'm looking for? Oh, no, morons.
Yeah, I mean, it's dumb, stupid. Yeah, it was funny. I appreciate the sensibility, but I would have liked to laugh a little bit more. I also think it is one of these situations where you can see how it might have made a better short film than a feature.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised what you say about how the original short film was and how they structured it, because it does feel like that middle
Because kind of when you're
section-
watching it, you're like, you could kind of do without this.
Yeah,
But it is.
well,
it's still
and the
fun,
the
though.
other thing is too, the whole premise of this boy bringing his dog back to life as Frankenweenie. It sounds like a neat idea, but then once Frankenweenie comes back to life and before you get to the other pets, Frankenweenie really isn't that interesting.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Exactly.
He's the same dog.
He is. He's really just basically a dog, and he looks. He has stitches and stuff, but he doesn't act really any different. And there's when he first leaves the house after having been resurrected, you're like, okay, now we're going to see a bunch of gags that grow out of the fact that he's
just
undead
like a
and he came
typical
back to life.
dog.
But he doesn't really do anything that a normal dog wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see, and that sequence, I think, is when the movie started to slow down a little bit for me, and you started to see like, oh yeah, there's really not much story here. You know what I mean? And then
There's not. I mean,
there really isn't. And then at the end, they when they brought in the science stuff and the other pets, it was fun and a little bit more interesting. But the pacing was a little off. It was a little bit of a thin story. I wish it would have been maybe a little bit funnier. I think all of that kept it from being like a really great movie, because you could see. I mean, something like this sounds like it would be really great. It was fun, but I didn't like it as much as like some other animated films that I've enjoyed.
Yeah, I think it definitely, unlike the Pixar movies, they do appeal to a wide audience. I mean, you have jokes for adults, and this really targets a specific type of person.
Yeah,
you
which
know?
I appreciated about
I like that too. It kind of
appreciated
spoke to me a little bit.
Yeah, well, and me too. And I appreciated the look of it, and then all the homages and the darkness of it. I enjoyed all that, but I do think as a film, it was lacking just a little something.
Yeah, and I guess one of my complaints is I probably haven't said this about another animated movie before, is that the voice acting didn't really come through. You think the one guy who I picked out right away, it was Martin Landau, who was that character, that teacher.
Yeah,
I thought it was really great, and like it really, I don't know, something resonated. It sounded different, or it sounded cool. All the other ones, they're doing like impressions of characters, like Peter Lorre, and other like horror-related characters. Boris Karloff was one of them, and I don't know. A lot of the time that's distracting. Like the whole time I'm watching the movie, I'm like, where have I heard that voice before? And you almost wish that they would tell you who played who before the movie starts.
Right.
But then I can't remember what movie it was, but there was one animated movie that did that showed like, here's our cast, like old movies would do. And I found it completely distracting.
Right, okay.
Because I was like, I know exactly who this person is, so it's like, I don't know what I want out of the movie. I think I don't like that.
Yeah.
But this is just like, I don't really know who played the characters, and once I found out, I didn't really care.
Okay.
It's like, I don't know, maybe with a different cast or something, or a different group of voice actors. I don't know. That's kind of, I haven't really thought that criticism out. But
yeah.
I did notice that, and that's something that I do notice about other animated movies, I guess. Strong voice performances. So maybe it was kind of lacking that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a little something lacking here, which, frankly, and this is just me personally, is often the case with Tim Burton movies. I feel like they're just kind of almost on the verge of being really great films, and there's just always a little something missing there.
Yeah.
But having said that, this was a fun movie to watch overall, and if you're looking for kind of a light appetizer to lead into your Halloween marathons, I think this is a good movie to start with.
Well, the only thing, the most important thing I'll say about this movie is that, like, the most interesting and fun part of the movie is not Frankenweenie.
No, not at all.
So it's, if you separate, watch the short, and then watch the middle section.
Right.
It's like, it probably shouldn't have been made into, they probably shouldn't have tried to combine those two movies,
yeah, that's
maybe.
what I'm saying.
Maybe come up with a completely original story involving a zombie dog or something, I don't know, but yeah, it was kind of a little disjointed in that way. So
a little bit, but
that middle section is so much fun.
It was fun.
It looks cool.
There was a giant turtle, and a good time was had. Not a great movie, but a fun animated film and a neat homage to especially the classic black and white Universal films, which I love. So not bad at all. So that one was very much about undead pets. I mean, that was the A plot. The second movie we watched is probably the most well-known undead pet film. I don't know that there's a whole lot of films in this subgenre, but it actually is really not about that. In Pet Semetary, a family moves to a new town. The husband and wife have 2 young children, and towards the beginning of the film, the daughter's cat, beloved pet cat, Church, is run over on this very busy highway that
which
runs
you know is going to happen
in
they
front
set
of the
it
house.
up
So they
for the
very
whole
heavily
movie.
foreshadowed. So this poor cat is killed. It turns out that behind the local pet cemetery created by children to bury their pets, there is an ancient Indian burial ground that what I think the brilliantly cast Fred Gwynn,
He's great. He was the
TV's
best part of
Herman
it.
Munster,
Yeah.
plays the elderly neighbor of the family, leads the father to this Indian burial ground hidden behind the pet cemetery. They bury the cat. The cat comes back to life, but it's like a mean version of
Starts
itself.
to behave differently,
Yes.
more evil.
Yes. But that portion of the film, it's not about a killer cat. That's really to set up this Indian burial ground, because later, of course,
Lo
the
and
main plot of
behold,
the movie,
the little baby.
the little cute little boy, is run over by a truck in a really harrowing sequence. I thought.
Yeah, it's creepy.
And, in his desperate grief, the father, of course, buries the child in this Indian burial ground, knowing that he will come back, even though he is warned that he will probably come back wrong. And indeed, he does, and horrible things continue to happen until the end of the movie. Now, this is one of my favorites from when I was a younger horror movie fan. Something about so many of the sequences in this movie, so many of the sequences just really resonated with me, and I found them to be really memorable. I hadn't seen it for several years, not since I was a young teenager, although I'd seen it many times. And I have to say, I think it mostly holds up. I think this is a good, effective horror film with ultimately a great story. What did you think of Pet Semetary?
I think it has a really good story too. I kind of like, we're going to have to spoil the end again. I like the fact that it ends kind of like a downer.
I love the last scene. I love the last shot. And the kind of increasing insanity that leads up to the end of the film.
I almost wish they wouldn't have shown as much as they did with the last shot. I wish it kind of would have ended with him maybe playing cards and he hears the door open. And then you kind of just play it in your mind what would have happened.
Yeah,
you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that could have worked too.
And they play it almost up to the point where he's killed, like the split second before he's killed. It's like, we know he's going to get killed. You don't need to show that much of it. That's a minor thing with
Okay.
I'm not quite buying this main actor's motivation and stuff. I don't know, because I think I said it even during the movie. It's like, if you play the scenario out, every instance, it's ended in horribly. Fred Gwynn's character, Judd, he's telling him about how he knows not to bury a human being up there. How there's this old legend. It's not a legend, it's true. It sounds like one, where some guy was buried after he came home from the war.
Yeah, at first,
he came back as a zombie.
At first they say no one's ever tried it with a human, but then you find out that it had happened
once
and of course
before,
gone horribly wrong.
And he comes back as a zombie. Then he's convinced of that, and he's like, okay, I'll bury my cat up there. Like, you got nothing to lose at that point, because he doesn't want to tell his daughter that her cat's dead.
Yeah, he doesn't really believe it or know.
Yeah, he doesn't
what's going
believe it
on
at this
that
point.
It just kind of goes along.
But by
with
the time he buries his kid, he's like absolutely convinced that there's something fucked up with this cat. The cat obviously is following this path that was, they laid it out for you, or he did. His character, or Judd, laid it out for you. It's like, this will happen. He didn't say, like, sometimes they come back and they're decent kids, and sometimes you bury them when they're like killers. It's like, no, this is a horrible idea all the way around.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to basically you have to be convinced that this guy is so desperate that he would do it.
Okay.
On the rare chance. And I guess I wasn't buying it, because this guy didn't seem like he was desperate at all. He was just kind of like a bland, I don't know. I didn't like the main guy in it. I think he was kind of a weak actor in it, I suppose.
I guess I'm just going to have to disagree with you on that point specifically because I feel like that exactly what you're talking about is one of the things that Pet Semetary does particularly well. And this is often a problem in horror movies. Very often the plot calls for intelligent people to do unintelligent things.
Of course. But it's almost a cheat when you put the cutest kid in the world in jeopardy, and you're...
Well, that was the story. I mean, the story was his child dies, and in desperation, he does this thing. And I bought it. I think enough time was spent with the father and the son and the mother, and you see the funeral, and it's horrible. And I think, I don't know that the main actor was a terrific actor, but I think he played this kind of escalating desperation and grief, and by the end he goes a little nuts. Yeah. I bought into his motivation throughout. I can easily believe that if you have a character who, because of the circumstances he's found himself in, somehow believes that there might be this power, might be able to bring his son back to life, and the grief is fresh in his mind. He's like in mourning. He's in shock. I can believe that he would do what he did. So that
I'm not like disbelieving it. I guess I just wasn't buying it as the movie was going along.
All right.
So, I don't know. I guess that wasn't, I don't think, a major problem because right away I said that I think it's a really good story.
Yeah.
There are a lot of creepy moments and like wincing moments. You get a scalpel to the
Achilles tendon. Fred Gwynne's character.
Where they show it go through. He gets cut across the mouth. Like the Joker from The Dark Knight, where you cut the mouth part there. And there was the scene like with the kid. There are two scenes with Gage when he came back as a zombie that are particularly scary. I think is when you see right before he finally kills Gage, I guess. You have to blow that too, but because you always wonder how do they do these things with child actors.
Yeah, I wonder that.
Like, I don't know how they
even
shot
still, I wonder how some of it you can see. It's like, okay, that was a dummy, and this is that,
or
but
like a midget's legs. It's got to be at some point. I would hope
but
so.
there were certain scenes where he's like, God, how did they get away with
and you're right, like when
he's grabbing
the scalpel, he's kind of like fumbling with it.
It looked like a
little
child's
kid
hand.
picking up a scalpel, so it's kind of particularly disturbing.
And I think that is part of what makes this movie so creepy.
I like the scene where he drops the person out of the he's in the attic and he drops them down and they're like hanging.
The mother,
you're not really sure. Oh yeah, that was her.
Yep.
You're not really sure like how this little kid.
Right.
He's got kind of like superhuman powers. I guess you got to believe.
Yeah.
You get like a split shot or like a split second shot of him like the kid looking down at like what he'd done and he's kind of giddy about it. He's like laughing, and it's really creepy because it's actually the kid. It's not a dummy.
Yeah.
The other scene I thought it was going to end on this scene is where he comes back. The main character, the father, comes back to the house after finding out that Gage had been resurrected, and his wife has come home, and he sees the little footprints leading into the basement. I thought that was really creepy too, because automatically your mind is just like doing the math, and you're like, oh, this is what's going on down there. It's like I don't need to see it, and the phone rings, and it's like they're like, oh, put her on the phone, and he's like, she's fine.
Yep.
And he's just like staring at the door. I thought it was honestly going to end like that. But I think the ending they picked out worked fine. I think that's kind of a hallmark of like a really good story, is you can kind of end at any point and you're like, it was like, well done. I think that's more the filmmaking aspect of it than the storytelling, I guess. Is like up to that point, you're like, oh, I'm satisfied with this movie so far. And I guess that it added another cool end scene. It's like, I don't know. I think it was really good. I think it had a lot of those really great, cool scenes in it.
Yeah, I think there were
well-told stories.
Yeah, there were a lot of memorable scenes, and there were a lot of like kind of cool, creepy, artistic touches to it as well. I like when he goes into the house at the end to finally, kill his son for, the zombie son. And when he goes into the house is all rotting and everything's skewed in the front, and there's really no explanation for why that would be that way. But it just kind of worked, and if they would have over-explained it, it wouldn't have worked as well.
Yeah.
I like that. Earlier in the film, you see a strange painting of a little boy in these old-fashioned clothes with a gray cat. I'm kind of getting goosebumps as I'm talking about it.
Well, I don't get goosebumps, but it was creepy.
And it's just this really odd, creepy looking
popping up
painting,
throughout the movie,
and you don't know what this is a painting of. And then you see later Gage is in that outfit, and of course the cat looks like Church. Again, no real explanation for what this painting was or how does it.
It's always just like in the background at some point. It's probably only in it maybe like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
but I remember. Yeah, your eyes kind of go to it.
Yeah, so there's little creepy kind of like touches.
You didn't even talk about your favorites.
I know, and then my favorite scene, which is the subplot with the mother remembering her sister, who died of, I guess now they said it was spinal meningitis. Mm-hmm. I talked about this scene in our favorite horror movie memories episode as one that particularly disturbed me.
So I don't think it lived up to that. I don't think that scene. I think the idea of it is really creepy.
But you can imagine how, if I saw it when I was younger, it really would have stuck with me.
But I think like the idea of it when it later pays off in the movie becomes increasingly scary.
Yeah.
That scene particularly looked kind of cheesy, I
Okay,
guess.
I'll
It's kind of
accept
painted in a foggy Saved by
I'll
the
accept
Bell
that.
way. The makeup doesn't look that great. It looks kind of like someone in almost like they don't look like they're a dying person, I guess.
Okay.
But then the idea of that later on is the mother is going into the house and she's remembering that her sister had died. The whole idea of that, like she had to take care of her sister, but she hated doing it.
Yeah.
And then she was kind of...
She
wasn't quite sure because she was at that age. You don't really understand. And even at the age she was at, it's hard to understand that. But where she's like, I don't know if I was happy or sad that
she said she wished for her sister to be dead. I think that is one of the things that most stuck with me about Pet Semetary, too, is that it's not just a scary movie about a zombie kid that comes back and slashes people with a razor blade, although it is that. At least. Well, and so much of what it touches on are disturbing, borderline taboo ideas. Right, the death of a child. I remember the
killer child.
The fist fight that takes place at the funeral, where the coffin falls. You see the little child's body weird. Being particularly disturbing. The death of an innocent young child. The whole thing about the sick sister dying secretly upstairs, and the sister secretly wishing for her to be dead. There were all these kind of like taboo. Just disturbing on some deep level subjects.
Even in the making of it, using a little kid to do all these weird things.
There's something like kind of delightfully perverse about this film that I just think adds to the horror of it.
Delightfully perverse.
It is. It really is. Yeah, it really is. So
I agree.
Yeah, so I think it mostly holds up. It's a good horror film. I think it's one of the better Stephen King adaptations for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so there you go. All right, well, that was our first October episode. So I hopefully, everyone is watching a lot of horror movies, or at least preparing to do so, as we get closer to every horror fan's favorite holiday, Halloween. And we will probably be back for at least one more episode before then. So we thank you for watching. We remind you to like us on Facebook, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Brain Says Strange Things. We'll see you real soon. Bye now.
Bye.